The illusion of paradise is the cruelest of all. It convinces you the war is over, right before the final battle begins. I believed I had found my paradise in that small A-frame cabin, nestled deep in the North Georgia mountains, just outside of Dahlonega. It was my sanctuary, the tangible proof of a life spent in quiet sacrifice. It was the reward for 40 years of hard work, of skipped vacations, of double shifts at a diner that smelled of stale coffee and bleach, of nights spent hunched over accounting books for a small firm, building something I could finally, irrevocably, call mine. That place, with its scent of pine and damp earth, represented every dream I had deferred: peace, stillness, the sound of the wind moving through the hemlocks like a whispered promise, the absolute freedom of not having to answer to anyone, of not having to be anything other than Evelyn, a 61-year-old woman who was, for the first time, simply at rest. Every dollar sunk into that property carried the weight of my tired hands, the permanent ache in my lower back, and the knees that no longer bent without a sharp complaint. But it was mine, only mine. That Friday afternoon in late October, I decided to drive up without telling anyone. I needed to escape the relentless noise of Atlanta, the endless obligations, the buzz of the phone that always seemed to be a prelude to a request. Mark, my son, had been distant for the past few weeks. Our conversations were clipped, his texts short and evasive. Chloe, his wife, hadn't returned my last 3 calls. I tried not to dwell on it, telling myself they were busy, that their silence was a symptom of their demanding lives, not a reflection of their feelings for me. I just wanted to get to my cabin, light the fireplace I had installed myself, make a strong cup of tea, and watch the Blue Ridge Mountains fade to purple until my soul could finally unclench. The gravel road crunched under the tires of my old Subaru. It had rained the day before, and the air was thick with the rich, clean aroma of the forest floor. That smell had always been a comfort, a reminder that there were still places in the world where I could be myself without a mask, without a role to fill. I was not Mom the fixer or Evelyn the reliable employee. I was just me. But as I rounded the last curve, the one that always opened up to the small clearing where my cabin stood, something inside me seized. My foot hit the brake. There were 3 vehicles parked in the driveway. One was Mark's silver sedan. I didn't recognize the other 2, a large black SUV and a smaller red compact. I knew, with a sudden cold certainty, that something was terribly wrong. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was that sharp, primal intuition that life drills into you, the one I had learned, painfully, never to ignore. I parked a few yards down the road, hidden by a bend, and just sat in the car for a long minute, trying to make sense of it. No one had asked my permission to use the cabin. No one had told me they were coming. In fact, the last time I'd managed to get Mark on the phone, he claimed he was swamped with a project at work, too busy to even think about getting out of the city. That, I now realized, had been a lie. I got out of the car slowly. My legs felt unsteady, not from weakness, but from a surge of contained, cold anger. I walked up the gravel path, each step an effort in self-control. Before I could even reach the porch, I heard it. Laughter. Loud, celebratory laughter, and the thumping bass of music that was definitely not mine. My blood ran cold. I didn't knock. I didn't have to. It was my house. I didn't need permission to enter what I had bled for. I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The first thing I saw was my living room, completely transformed. My furniture was still there, the heavy oak table, the worn leather sofa, but everything else was alien. The photographs I had hung with such care, the ones that told the story of my life, were gone. The sepia-toned picture of my parents on their wedding day, the framed photo of my grandmother, the snapshots of Mark as a child, grinning with missing teeth, all of it had been removed. In their place were bright, generic art prints and photos I didn't recognize. On my dining table, there were open wine bottles, plates piled with the remains of an expensive-looking meal, and countless dirty glasses. The fireplace was roaring. Someone had turned my sanctuary into their private party. Chloe was the first to see me. She was lounging on my favorite armchair, the one I had saved for 6 months to buy, a glass of red wine held loosely in her hand, an expression of perfect, self-satisfied comfort on her face. When our eyes met, her face didn't register surprise, not even guilt. What I saw was a flash of pure, unadulterated annoyance, as if I were a delivery person who had interrupted her perfect afternoon. She stood up slowly, deliberately setting her glass down on my antique coffee table with a sharp thud that silenced the music and made everyone in the room turn to look at me. Mark was sitting by the window. His face went chalk white when he saw me, a look of such profound, childish dread that it almost made me pity him. Almost. Next to him, occupying my sofa as if they owned it, were David and Susan, Chloe's parents. They were two people I barely knew, people I found shallow and grasping, and they were now looking at me with mild curiosity. Chloe crossed her arms and took a step toward me. Her gaze was pure ice, a barely contained disdain that she had never bothered to hide from me. There was no greeting. No, oh my God, Evelyn, what a surprise. No explanation. Only a single question, loaded with so much venom it nearly took my breath away. "What do you want here, you old trespasser?" The silence that followed was so heavy, so absolute, it felt like the air had been sucked from the room. No one moved, no one breathed. Everyone was looking at me, waiting for my reaction. They were waiting for me to break, to stammer an apology, to back down, as I had been conditioned to do my entire life for the sake of peace. But something inside me, something I thought had eroded away decades ago, finally snapped. It wasn't just the invasion of my property. It was the breathtaking audacity, the total, profound lack of respect, the nerve to treat me as if I were the one in the wrong, as if I didn't have the right to be in the very house I had purchased with the calluses on my hands. Chloe continued, her voice rising, full of a strange, unfounded confidence. "I'm going to call the police," she said, her lip curling. "You can't just walk into private property like this without permission. This is trespassing." A strange, preternatural calm settled over me. It wasn't resignation, it was clarity. Absolute, diamond-hard clarity. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly what to do. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to demand an explanation. I was just going to stand my ground. I was just going to watch as their carefully constructed world of lies and entitlement began to crumble. I smiled. It was a small, controlled smile, but Chloe saw it, and something in her defiant expression flickered. She had expected tears. She had expected a retreat. She had not expected this. Not this calm. "Go ahead," I said, my voice firm and clear, cutting through the heavy silence. "Call the police, if you have the nerve." I walked slowly past her, into the center of my own living room, and sat down on the sofa opposite hers. I clasped my hands in my lap and looked at each of them, one by one. Mark refused to meet my gaze, staring intently at the floor as if it held the answers to the universe. David and Susan exchanged nervous, uncertain glances. Chloe was still standing, her phone now in her hand, but her finger hovered over the screen, her bravado faltering. Something in my attitude, my refusal to be the victim she had cast me as, had thrown her completely off balance. I sat there, an island of calm in the wreckage of my sanctuary, surrounded by people who had invaded my space, lied to me, and erased my presence. But I no longer felt fear. I no longer felt doubt. I only felt a cold, absolute determination. I was going to reclaim what was mine. I was going to watch as every single one of them faced the consequences of their actions. And I was going to do it without raising my voice, without losing my composure, because true strength doesn't need to shout. True strength waits. And I had waited long enough. Chloe was still standing there, phone in hand, her fingers paralyzed. I could see the confusion warring with the anger in her eyes. She had gambled on me being a weak, hysterical old woman who would flee in shame. I had refused to play my part. "You're not going to call?" I asked, my voice quiet, almost kind. "I told you to go ahead. I'm waiting." Mark shot up from his chair. His face was pale, almost gray, slick with a fine sheen of sweat. I knew that expression. It was the same look he'd had at 12 when he broke our neighbor's window and tried to blame it on a stray dog. He walked toward Chloe and put a hand on her shoulder, a weak attempt to restrain her. She shook him off, a gesture of pure contempt. "I don't need your permission, Mark," she hissed, her eyes locked on me. "Someone has to set some boundaries around here." David, Chloe's father, cleared his throat from his place on the couch. He was a large man with a booming voice, accustomed to being the center of any room he was in. He rose slowly, a calculated performance of authority, and came to stand beside his daughter, a physical reinforcement of her position. "Mrs. Martin," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, as if speaking to a confused child. "Evelyn, I think there's been a simple misunderstanding here. Mark gave us permission to use the cabin for the long weekend. He told us you were traveling, that you wouldn't be coming, that there would be no problem at all. In fact, he assured us that you had personally authorized this." I felt the blood rush to my head, a hot flush of rage, but I kept my voice perfectly level. So that was the lie. That was the narrative they had woven to justify their hostile takeover. They hadn't just occupied my home, they had used my name, inventing an authorization I never gave, twisting the truth to paint themselves as welcome guests. "Mark told you that?" I asked, shifting my gaze to my son. "You told them I authorized this?" Mark opened his mouth, but only a small, choking sound came out. His eyes darted between me and Chloe, then to her parents, desperately seeking an exit that didn't exist. The truth was laid bare between us, ugly and undeniable. Susan, Chloe's mother, spoke up from her seat. She was a thin woman with a reedy, sharp voice and a perpetual look of aggrieved superiority that had grated on me since the day I met her. "We had no idea you weren't aware," she said, clasping her hands with false innocence. "Mark invited us. He said it was to be a family weekend, that you were planning to join us tomorrow, and that we should come up early and get everything ready for your arrival. We even cleaned the house for you, see? We went grocery shopping. We brought all this food so you would be comfortable." The lie was so elaborate, so carefully constructed, it was almost impressive, almost. But I knew every inch of this house. I knew exactly how I had left it 2 weeks prior. And what I saw was not a house prepared for my arrival. It was a house occupied, transformed, stripped of my identity to make room for theirs. "So, Mark lied to you," I said simply, letting the words drop like stones into the still, tense air. "Because I never gave any authorization. I never said I was traveling. I never knew you would be here." The silence slammed down on the room again, but this time it was different. It was heavy with discomfort, with the shifting sands of alliances. David and Susan exchanged another glance, this one less certain. Chloe squeezed her phone so hard her knuckles were white. Mark still wouldn't look at me. "That's not true," Chloe finally snapped, her voice rising in pitch. "Mark wouldn't lie about something like that. You must have forgotten. At your age, it's normal for things to get confused, for your memory to fail." There it was. The first direct attack, the classic weapon of dismissal. The strategy to paint me as a senile, confused old woman who couldn't trust her own mind. It was a tactic I had seen her use in subtle ways for years, but now, in her desperation, she had wielded it like a club. I stood up slowly, not to leave, but because I wanted them all to see me, to see the absolute lack of confusion in my eyes. "My memory is perfectly fine, Chloe," I said, my voice as clear and cold as the mountain air outside. "I remember every single conversation I've had with Mark in the last month. I remember him telling me he was too busy to talk. I remember you stopped answering my calls 2 weeks ago, and I remember, with perfect clarity, that this property is in my name, that I paid every single dollar of the mortgage, that I maintain this place, and that no one, absolutely no one, has the right to be here without my explicit permission." I walked slowly toward the wall where my family photographs used to hang. The nail holes were still there, stark and empty. "Where are my photographs?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Where are the pictures of my parents, my grandparents, of my son when he was a little boy?" No one answered. Chloe looked away, suddenly fascinated by the fireplace. Susan sat down again, smoothing her skirt, deeply uncomfortable. David cleared his throat, but said nothing. We put them away. Mark finally mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. We thought you might want to refresh the decor. They're in the upstairs closet, in a box. You thought I wanted to refresh the decor? I repeated, letting the absurdity of the lie hang in the air. Or did you just decide that my presence, my history, wasn't necessary? That you could just erase me from my own home and replace my life with whatever you preferred? Chloe finally exploded. Her carefully constructed facade of control shattered, and all the raw, entitled anger she had been suppressing surged to the surface. This is ridiculous. Mark is your son. He has a right to use this house. You're always saying that what's yours is his. That you worked so hard to leave him something, and now you're going to begrudge us one weekend? He has a right if I give him permission, I replied icily. He has a right if he asks. He has a right if he treats me and my home with a basic level of respect. But sneaking in behind my back, lying about my authorization, removing my personal belongings, and then calling me a trespasser when I arrive at my own property? That is not a right. That is an invasion. Chloe took a menacing step toward me, her face flushed with fury. You know what? You're right. I am calling the police. I'm going to tell them there's an agitated woman in our house, that she's causing problems, that we feel threatened. I smiled again, that same calm, unnerving smile. Go ahead, I said, for the third and final time. Please do. In fact, I insist. I think it's exactly what we need right now, a neutral third party who can see this situation with perfect clarity. And this time, Chloe's finger pressed the screen. The sound of the phone dialing 911 echoed in the silent room. Chloe had activated the speakerphone, a petty, theatrical move designed to intimidate me, to show me she was serious. Her hand trembled, but her expression was one of pure defiance. Mark had sunk back into his chair, his head in his hands. David and Susan watched, silent and grim. A calm female voice answered on the other end. 911, what is your emergency? Chloe took a deep breath, composing her voice into a mask of fear and vulnerability. Yes, hello. I need help. There's a woman in our house. She's causing a disturbance. She entered without permission, and she's threatening us. She won't leave. We're at the cabin on Mountain Laurel Drive, mile marker 18. My blood boiled, but I remained perfectly still. Every word was a calculated lie. Our house, entered without permission, threatening us. All of it designed to cast me as the unstable aggressor. Is the person in immediate danger? Is she armed? The operator asked. Chloe shot me a look of pure hatred. I don't know. She's very agitated. She's in her 60s, but she's acting irrationally. We're scared. A unit is on the way, ma'am. Can you stay in a safe place? Do not confront the person. Yes, we'll try, Chloe replied, ending the call with exaggerated drama. She turned to the room, a triumphant smirk on her face. You heard her. The police are on their way. You had better leave before they get here, or this is going to get much worse for you. I sat back down on the sofa. I crossed my legs and placed my hands in my lap. I was not going anywhere. I'm not moving, I said calmly. In fact, I'm eager to speak with the authorities. I think they'll find what I have to show them very interesting. The confidence on Chloe's face wavered, just for a second, but I saw it. Mark lifted his head, his eyes wide with a new, dawning horror. He knew. He knew what I had. The next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. No one spoke. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the nervous tapping of David's foot on the hardwood floor. Chloe paced in front of the window, peering out into the twilight. Mark remained motionless, a statue of shame. And I just sat, waiting, with a patience forged from decades of swallowing my own anger. Finally, we heard the crunch of tires on the gravel. A patrol car from the county sheriff's department pulled up, its blue and red lights painting the living room in flashes of alternating color. 2 officers got out. One was an older man, robust and weather-beaten, with a name tag that read Bridges. The other was a younger woman, sharp and alert, Chen. Chloe ran to the door and flung it open with a performance of profound relief. "Thank God you're here, officer. She's inside. She just walked in without permission, and she refuses to leave. She's been threatening us." The officers entered cautiously, their eyes scanning the room, assessing the threat. Officer Bridges looked at me, sitting calmly on the sofa, and then at Chloe, who was vibrating with staged anxiety. "Who is the owner of this property?" he asked, his voice a neutral, authoritative rumble. Chloe opened her mouth to speak, but I spoke first. "I am," I said, standing up. "My name is Evelyn Martin. This is my property." "That's not true." Chloe interrupted immediately. "She's my husband's mother. We have permission to be here. She's the one who came in unannounced and is causing all this trouble." Officer Bridges looked at me, and his expression was one I had seen 1,000 times before. It was the look of a man who had already decided to believe the younger, more articulate, more rational person. It was the look that dismissed me as a confused, emotional old woman, probably involved in a petty family squabble. "Ma'am?" he said, his voice laced with that familiar, patronizing tone. "Do you have any documents with you to prove this property is yours?" I smiled. This was the moment. "Yes, officer. As a matter of fact, I have all the necessary documents right here." I walked to my purse, which I had left by the door. I opened it, my hands perfectly steady, and pulled out a worn leather folder. Inside were the property deeds, the most recent property tax bill, the utility bills in my name, and the letter from the bank, dated just 3 months prior, confirming that the mortgage was paid in full. I handed the folder to Officer Bridges. He took it, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, and began to review the documents. He read each page carefully, his expression shifting from bored skepticism to sharp focus. Officer Chen moved closer to look over his shoulder. They exchanged a significant glance. "Everything appears to be in your name, ma'am," Officer Bridges said, his tone now stripped of all condescension. He turned to look at Chloe, his eyes hard. "Mrs. Evelyn Martin is the sole registered owner of this property." The color drained from Chloe's face. David stood up abruptly. Susan let out a small, sharp gasp. Mark closed his eyes, as if wishing he could simply cease to exist. But Mark is her son?" Chloe stammered, her voice suddenly small. "He told us we could be here. He said she gave permission." Officer Chen spoke this time, her voice crisp and professional. "Ma'am, the fact that he is the owner's son does not give him an automatic right to occupy the property without her consent. And Mrs. Martin is stating she never gave that consent." "I never gave it," I said, my voice clear and strong, resonating in the quiet room. "I arrived here this afternoon expecting to find my house empty, and I found this party. They have occupied my home, removed my personal photographs, brought in their own things, and lied to their relatives, saying I had authorized it. And when I, the owner, showed up, they called me a trespasser and threatened to call the police on me. Well, here are the police. And here are the documents that prove I am the only one with the right to be here." Officer Bridges turned to Chloe, his expression grim. "It's clear, ma'am, that Mrs. Martin did not give you permission to be here." Chloe looked desperately at Mark, pleading for him to say something, to fix this, but he remained silent, a monument to his own cowardice. Finally, it was David who spoke, trying to salvage the situation. "Officer, this was just a misunderstanding," he said, his voice tense. "Mark invited us. We truly thought everything was in order." "It was not a misunderstanding," I interjected. "It was a deliberate lie. And now I want all of you off my property. Immediately." Officer Chen was taking notes. Officer Bridges looked at me, his gaze now respectful. "Mrs. Martin, you are well within your rights to ask them to vacate. Do you wish to file a formal complaint for trespassing?" I looked at each of them. At Chloe, her face a mask of rage and humiliation. At David and Susan, trying to look like innocent victims. And at Mark, my son, broken by his own shame. I felt something inside me break, but it wasn't sadness. It was the last chain of my old life snapping. "I just want them to leave," I said simply. "Now." Officer Bridges nodded gravely. He turned to the stunned group. "You heard her. You must vacate the property immediately. Mrs. Martin has proven she is the sole legal owner and has requested you leave. If you do not do so voluntarily, we will be forced to proceed with a formal eviction." Chloe opened her mouth to protest, but Officer Chen cut her off. "You can gather your personal belongings now, but you must be off the premises within the next 30 minutes. I watched as the reality settled on their faces, the public humiliation, the brutal unmasking of their lie. But that was only the beginning. There was something else. Something I had been putting off for years. Something I had avoided out of fear, out of misplaced love, out of that terrible, ingrained habit of sacrificing myself for people who didn't value me. "Officer," I said calmly, "before they go, there's one more thing. I need you to witness this." Everyone looked at me. Mark lifted his head, his eyes wide, full of a new, sick dread. He knew. After all these years, he knew what was coming. I went back to my purse and pulled out a second folder. This one was thicker, heavier. It contained years of receipts, bank transfers, contracts, and emails. I opened it on the dining room table, pushing aside the dirty plates. "Mark," I said, looking directly at him, "how much money have I given you in the last 5 years?" He turned even paler, if that was possible. "Mom, please. Answer the question." The silence was deafening. Chloe was looking at him, confused, not yet understanding what was happening. The officers remained attentive, silent witnesses. I don't know, exactly," he murmured. "I do," I said. I pulled out the first summary sheet. $42,000. In the last 5 years, I have transferred $42,000 to you. $15,000 for the down payment on your condo. $8,000 for the wedding Chloe wanted, the one that went $5,000 over budget. $5,500 to pay off Chloe's credit card debt after your honeymoon. $1,200 for an emergency car repair. The rest in small, desperate increments of a few $100s at a time, every time you came up short. Chloe took a step back, as if I had struck her. David and Susan exchanged looks of pure shock. "Furthermore," I continued, my voice gaining strength as I pulled out more papers, "I pay for your car insurance. That's $310 a month. I also, for some reason, pay for Chloe's premium gym membership. That's $150 a month. And for the past 2 years, ever since you got in a tight spot, I have been covering 20% of your mortgage payment. That's another $800 every single month." I placed each document on the table. Bank statements, canceled checks, emails from Mark, pleading for help. "Mom, I'm desperate. Mom, just this one last time." It was all there, in black and white, impossible to deny. "In total," I said, my voice trembling now, not with weakness, but with the righteous fury of decades, "in the last 5 years alone, I have invested over $68,000 in keeping your adult lives afloat. And that's not counting the gifts, the dinners, the clothes." My voice finally broke, thick with years of accumulated pain. "And this is how you repay me? By invading my home, by lying about me, by erasing my photographs as if I don't exist, as if I'm just a bank account, not a person?" Mark had tears streaming down his face. He stood up and tried to approach me. "Mom, I didn't know," Chloe said. "No." I held up a hand, stopping him. "Don't you dare blame only her. You allowed this. You lied about my authorization. You brought these people to my property. You watched them take down my pictures. You decided my space, my sacrifice, meant nothing. You sat there and let your wife call me an old trespasser in the house I bought for my own peace, a house you will apparently inherit, and you said nothing." I turned to the officers who were watching this domestic tragedy unfold with grim professionalism. "I want you to be witnesses to what I am about to say and do." I took out my phone. My hands were not shaking anymore. They were steady, sure, and determined. I opened my banking application. "As of this moment, I am canceling all automatic transfers to the account of Mark Martin. I am canceling the payment for his car insurance. I am canceling the monthly contribution to his mortgage. I am canceling the payment for Chloe's gym. I pressed the buttons, one by one, confirming each cancellation. Each click was a sound of liberation. Chloe watched, her face a mask of growing horror as the implications began to dawn on her. David had sat down heavily, understanding the full scope of what he was witnessing. "Mom, wait," Mark pleaded. "We can talk about this. We can fix this." "There is nothing to fix," I replied, not looking up from the phone. "For years, I have fixed your problems. I have paid your debts. I have covered your mistakes. And I did it because I loved you, because you are my son. I thought it was my duty to support you, but I confused support with enabling. I confused love with being used." I finished the last cancellation and put the phone away. Then I took another document from the folder. "The car you drive, Mark, is in my name. I co-signed the loan because your credit wasn't good enough. If you stop paying, they come after me. This week, I will be speaking with the bank to have my name removed. If you cannot assume the full payment on your own, you will have to return the vehicle." "You can't do that," Chloe finally shrieked, the panic in her voice raw and real. "That's our car. We need it for work." "You should have thought about that before," I said coldly. "Before you disrespected me, before you assumed I would always be there to clean up your mess, no matter how badly you treated me." Susan spoke for the first time in several minutes, her reedy voice sharp with indignation. "This is cruelty. This is your family. How can you be so hard on your own son?" I turned to her, my calm absolute. "Hard? You want to know what's hard, Susan? Working 60 hours a week for 30 years to give my son a life I never had. Sacrificing my own dreams to pay for his college so he wouldn't have debt. Going without vacations so he could go to Europe. And then, at 61, discovering that my family sees me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited, a person who doesn't even deserve the respect of a common stranger." My voice rose for the first time, charged with the pain of a lifetime. "You and David moved in with them 3 months ago because you couldn't afford your own rent. Do you know who was subsidizing that generosity? I was. With the $800 a month I put toward that mortgage, I am paying for you to have a roof over your heads while you sit in my house and watch your daughter call me a trespasser." David opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The truth was too blunt, too brutal to deny. I took the final document from the folder, the copy of their mortgage agreement. "Tomorrow morning, I am contacting the bank. You will have to cover the full payment yourselves. If you can't, the bank will begin foreclosure proceedings in 90 days. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the officers looked uncomfortable. Chloe had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. David and Susan were pale, motionless. And Mark just wept, openly and silently, tears of complete and utter ruin. I put all the documents back in the folder with slow, deliberate movements. Each paper I folded was a chapter closed, a chain broken. "You have 30 minutes, I said, looking at Officer Bridges. "That's correct," he nodded, checking his watch. "We will wait outside to ensure the property is vacated without further incident." The 2 officers stepped out onto the porch, leaving us in a final, agonizing moment of privacy I hadn't asked for. Robert was the first to move. He staggered toward me, his steps hesitant. "Mom," his voice broke. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't want this. I thought you wouldn't mind us coming up for a few days." "A few days?" I repeated, my voice devoid of emotion. "And the photographs? And the lie that I gave permission? And calling me a trespasser?" "That was Chloe," he said quickly, desperately. "She was nervous. She didn't think." "No, I cut him off. Don't blame her. Not just her. You were here. You saw how she treated me. You didn't say a word. You didn't defend me. You let her. You are just as responsible." He lowered his head, defeated. Chloe finally found her voice, but the arrogance was gone, replaced by pure panic. "Evelyn, please, you can't. You can't just cut us off. How will we pay the mortgage? The car? Mark has to get to work." "You will figure it out," I said. "Just as I figured it out when I was your age, with no one to help me." "Mrs. Martin," David tried, his voice now soft, pleading. I understand you're upset, but think about this. It's almost the holidays. Do you really want your family to be on the street for Christmas? They won't be on the street, I replied. They'll be in the condo I helped them buy, the one you live in for free, only now they'll have to pay for it. They'll have to adjust, make sacrifices, just like I did, for my entire life. They began to pack, a frantic, chaotic scramble. Suitcases were zipped, bags were stuffed. No one spoke, only the sound of their world crumbling. One by one, they filed out, carrying their belongings. Mark was the last. He stopped at the door, his face swollen. Mom, is there any way you can forgive us? I looked at him, my son, the man I had loved more than my own life. Forgiveness, Mark, doesn't come with an attached check. If I can ever forgive you, it will be when you've learned to be responsible for your own life. When you understand that love doesn't mean using someone. When you've grown up, but you'll have to do it without my help. He nodded, a single, jerky movement, and walked out. I watched from the window as the 3 cars started, their taillights disappearing down the dark gravel road. The officers gave me a respectful nod and left. And then I was alone. The silence of the mountain rushed in, and for the first time in my life, it felt truly, completely like peace. I went upstairs and found the box. I pulled out my photographs, my parents, my grandparents, Mark as a child. I hung each one back in its rightful place. I was reclaiming my history. My phone vibrated. A text from a number I didn't recognize. It must have been Chloe's. Mom, we're on the road. Please reconsider. We can't do this without your help. I beg you. I looked at the message for a long time. Then I typed my reply. I love you, Mark, but love does not mean allowing you to disrespect me. Learn to live within your means. Learn to be responsible. When you have done that, we can talk. I sent the message. Then, with a steady hand, I blocked his number, and Chloe's, and David's, and Susan's. I turned off the ringer, lit the fire, and finally, made my cup of tea. I had learned, in the most painful way possible, that loving someone sometimes means loving yourself more. It means teaching them that actions have consequences, that respect is not optional, and that a mother's love, while deep, is not a blank check for a lifetime of irresponsibility. True love isn't enabling. True love is letting them fall, and trusting that they will, eventually, learn to stand on their own.